At Joyce Meyer Ministries, something unexpected is taking place behind the scenes. Joyce abruptly left Daystar TV in 2025 after 20 years of service. Although the official explanation was kept secret, records that were leaked reveal a different narrative. This time, there are grave accusations that go beyond financial gain. Her ministry is struggling to find new channels as its audience continues to decline. According to insiders, this might be the start of the end. The woman who created a $100 million empire is currently going through her lowest point. What actually took place at Daystar? Joyce Meyer was born in South St. Louis on June 4, 1943, as Pauline Joyce Hutcherson. The city seemed heavy with change at the beginning of World War II, but her home felt much heavier. On the day of her birth, her machinist father was drafted into the army. He was gone for 3 years after leaving practically immediately. June 1943 through June 1946. Nothing was the same when he eventually returned to the house. Something dark had been etched into him by war. He spoke less, drank more, and exuded a sort of rage that permeated every space. Already struggling financially, the emotional burden got heavier. Although the working-class neighborhoods surrounding her appeared intimate and stable, there was only conflict within her home. Layer by layer, the terror that pervaded those formative years remained with her and became the foundation of her childhood. As she became older, her father's internal harm started to show. He developed control over his drinking, which eventually led to abuse. Joyce began to find the regulations odd when she was about 5 years old. Isolation soon followed, and the penalties became more severe. She grew up in a home where even minor infractions had serious repercussions, and she observed other children, music, playing freely. She claims that the sexual assault started when she was just 3 years old, in 1946. The fact that music resided within the walls was a secret. Fearful and battered by her own struggles with him, her mother said nothing. Everything was made worse by that quiet music. Joyce felt stuck in a world she couldn't leave after learning early on that no one was coming to her aid. Her mother's strength gradually diminished in the meantime. She had been battered, blamed, and disregarded for years. Joyce was navigating life without the support of her current mother by the time she was 7 years old. She bore the weight of what transpired behind closed doors as well as her own feelings and suffering. On certain days, she looked everywhere for solace but found nothing. There were times when her mother left the room rather than intervening. Joyce felt a tiny bit of herself disappear each time. She was fashioned by her loneliness, and the pain persisted. Nevertheless, something within her started searching for a different type of light. She was 9 years old when that light first appeared. She began reading a Bible by herself in 1952 while seated in a small South St. Louis classroom. It was like a peaceful doorway leading to a more comfortable environment. She felt as though soft hands were reaching out to embrace her with the words of forgiveness and love. As she continued to read, she gradually began to feel a new strength come into her life. She then experienced a spiritual awakening and became a Christian. She thought it might briefly brighten the shadows surrounding her house. However, the assault persisted the night after she got back from church. Since the family continued to appear religious from the outside, her faith did not provide her with security but instead made her feel even more alone. Nothing was different inside. For almost 10 years, the abuse persisted, occurring roughly once a week. The years 1952 to 1962 were characterized by a profound quiet that nearly engulfed her. As she grew older, the abuse got harsher. Joyce later said that from the age of 10 to the age of 18, her father had abused her at least once a week. Each of the more than 200 instances that resulted from that left a lasting impression that was invisible to others. He kept her silent by instilling terror. He made her feel bad by telling falsehoods. She believed him when he told her what would happen if she spoke up. He even went after other neighborhood girls. However, Joyce was the target of the most attacks. Everything was meticulously arranged. Silence was essential. And there seemed to be no end to the silence. Something more darker came into play about the time she was in her early teens. To keep her under control, her father started using pornography. He made her watch it against her will, confusing her and shattering her identity. She felt awkward, humiliated, and odd with other children. The schoolwork slid. Knowing what he may do, she stopped inviting friends around. She felt unworthy by the time she turned 12. Not only because of his actions, but also because of his daily words to her. Her psyche was eroded by each insult. Each danger fell farther. And the loneliness was only heightened by her mother's silent anguish in the backdrop. Her existence was encircled by a tightrope of confusion, anxiety, and guilt. One of the most painful scars was her mother's silence. Joyce yearned for someone to defend her. However, her mother was ensnared in her own web of anxiety. She decided to keep quiet since she couldn't stand the embarrassment that would accompany speaking up. She acknowledged it years later. She claimed she was unable to deal with the music controversy. It was too late for the apology. It was unable to take away Joyce's memories of being alone in her own house. She learned the most difficult lesson of her childhood from that quiet. Sometimes the person you trust to keep you safe is unable to do so. In 1961, at the age of 18, she started running. The memories were still strong and the agony was still present as she left the house. She didn't have much money or true support. She took any employment that might help her make ends meet, including working as a secretary in a nearby insurance office. Fear followed her everywhere, even after she left home. Her life had been marked by mistrust and worry due to the years of abuse. However, she breathed her first breath of freedom as soon as she left that house. Even if it was unsteady. Her first marriage happened quickly. She was yearning for someone to treat her differently because she was young. Rather, she chose a man whom she subsequently referred to as a scammer. He was lying. He was unfaithful. He was a thief. Twice he left her stranded. In California, I once had nothing but a carton of drink bottles and a penny. The marriage ended in 1966 after 5 traumatic years. She returned to her parents' house, which was already tarnished by traumatic experiences. In an attempt to find security, she soon engaged into a second marriage, although that too was fraught with emotional turmoil. She was hurt, resentful, furious, and unclear of what to do after these early encounters. At the age of 22, she gave birth to her first child, Laura, in 1965. She was a full-time bank teller and lived in a small apartment. She was hardly able to pay for necessities. She began to experience depression. Every day, the burden of both new obligations and old anguish weighed heavily on her chest. Although it occasionally helped, counseling was never able to address the underlying causes of her suffering. She struggled with dread, remorse, and rage while feeling lost in her own thoughts. On certain days, she found it difficult to perform basic tasks. But in the midst of all that gloom, she gradually began to re-establish her faith. Although it took years, such modest actions marked the start of her recovery and the cornerstone of the future ministry she would establish. In 1976, Joyce Meyer was 33 years old when something occurred that affected her for the remainder of her life. Exhausted and angry, she was praying in the same manner she had prayed countless times as she drove to work in the early hours of the morning. Then something changed. She then claimed to have heard her name spoken 3 times, clearly and intimately, filling her automobile with a presence that made her shudder. It simultaneously astonished and delighted her. Since she was a young girl, she had been a Christian. But during those years, she felt hollow and nearly engrossed in her daily routine. It felt different that day. It was as if someone were speaking directly into the areas where she kept quiet. She felt practically intoxicated with God's Spirit when she returned home that evening. The sensation lingered in her mind. It became ingrained in her and altered the way she read the Bible, prayed, and even perceived herself. It was the moment that transformed her from a quiet believer into someone who desired guidance and action. She began modestly shortly after this pivotal moment. During lunch breaks, she collected some co-workers and shared a Bible with them. Her pastor recommended a Thompson Chain Reference Bible to her when she asked him what she should study first. She started lecturing after opening it to John 1 verse 1. Even though there were only 25 or 30 people there at initially, they continued to return every Tuesday night, rain or shine. They appreciated how she discussed issues they had at work and at home. She discussed her own difficulties. When she was studying something challenging, she was forthright. She added another study on Thursday afternoons at a friend's house because the group grew so fast. For 5 years, that second group operated. People came because the music courses were authentic, straightforward, and relevant to their daily lives. She and her spouse had joined Life Christian Center in Fenton, Missouri, by the early 1980s. There were just approximately 30 members of this tiny, struggling church. Joyce anticipated that only a few ladies would attend her home-based women's Bible study. Rather, 115 people attended the initial meeting. It quickly increased to 500 per week. After noticing her enthusiasm, Pastor Rick Shelton asked her to cover on Sundays. Her account of overcoming abuse had a profound impact on many. He ordained her as an associate pastor in 1980, which was uncommon for a woman at the time. She provided counseling to those with wounds similar to her own. Additionally, she assisted Shelton in leading a 15-minute radio discussion about scripture-based emotional recovery. The seeds for something far larger were sown by that little performance. At the age of 40, she launched her own music radio show, Life in the Word, in 1983. It began by airing on just one St. Louis station, but it quickly gained popularity. Before long, it was broadcast on 6 stations throughout the Midwest, reaching listeners in cities like Kansas City and Chicago. Because she did not conceal what she had experienced, her voice was distinctive. She talked candidly about experiencing abuse. She talked openly about pain, shame, terror, and how she regained her breath. Despite being barely 15 minutes long, the show had a powerful impact on the audience. Her ratings had increased by 50% by 1984. Music appeals to many listeners, particularly ladies who have experienced trauma. They felt like someone finally understood them during those 15 minutes. Her candor transformed people's lives. She received letters from people who said they felt noticed for the first time. She described how, from childhood to the age of 18, her father sexually assaulted her at least 200 times. She didn't tell these tales to startle people. She instructed them to demonstrate the possibility of healing. By the middle of the 1980s, she was getting hundreds of emails every week from people who wanted prayer, counseling cassettes, or just someone to tell them they could survive another day. Her bravery made it possible for many Christians to discuss trauma in public for the first time. By 1985, she was still an associate pastor, but the workload became too much for her to manage. After resigning, she formally established Life in the Word as a standalone nonprofit organization. Initially, she operated it from her house. At first, listeners provided all of the funding, roughly $50,000 annually. It grew quickly. She employed people. She promoted her husband, Dave, to manager of the company. The crew put in a lot of overtime to keep up with counseling, music, requests, tape orders, and letters. The ministry was formally established in August 1985, and it was granted tax exemption in May 1986. Although it was little, the foundation was solid and intimate. She published her Battlefield of the Mind radio series during this time. Everything was altered by that series. She discussed the kind of conflicts that most individuals keep hidden. She discussed terrible memories, fear, depression, and the ideas that kept individuals up at night. Over 10,000 of those cassettes were sold in 1986 alone. The music on the tapes, according to listeners, helped them regain mental control, breathe more easily, and sleep better. In the end, the series turned into one of her best-selling novels. However, in those early years, it was only her voice penetrating the shadows that individuals believed they had to battle alone. Her ascent was noisy. By the middle of the 1980s, she was being criticized by some local religious leaders for discussing wealth. They claimed that she portrayed faith as a means of obtaining wealth. St. Louis newspapers published articles that cast doubt on her message. They were concerned that it would mislead people, particularly those who are already having financial difficulties. The criticism increased in tandem with the growth of her ministry. She was criticized by some of advocating a name it and claim it style of instruction. She was the subject of arguments for decades. Nevertheless, she continued to teach because she thought her message enabled people to overcome their fear. She entered the television industry in 1993, at the age of 50. On WGN-TV and BT, she debuted Enjoying Everyday Life. It began as a local 30-minute show. It reached over 1 million individuals every month in just 2 years. Her honest, emotive style forced viewers to pause and pay attention. She shared her personal history in a way that helped others feel less alone. The show was broadcast via satellite in 20 countries by 1997. In order to assist viewers comprehend trauma, she acted out scenes. Some stations even temporarily stopped airing her show because they thought the material was too mature for young viewers. She maintained her position. She felt that healing came from being honest. Her ministry continued to grow. In Fenton, Missouri, they relocated to a new $20 million headquarters in 1997. Over $100 million in donations over time provided the funds. She was able to produce more than 300 episodes of her show annually thanks to the production facility on the new campus. Sending her message across languages and nations, it became the center of her work. She continued to be candid about her private life. She discussed the adultery in her second marriage as well as her 3 divorces. She made advantage of every error and wound to make someone else feel less self-conscious. Although not everyone approved of her strategies, her candor continued to draw in people who shared her suffering. She and her spouse founded the St. Louis Dream Center in 2000. It grew to be a 100-acre facility for those coping with poverty, addiction, and trauma. For males who needed a place to start over, they provided housing, food programs, after-school assistance, and addiction recovery. Over $5,000 persons are assisted by the center annually. But increased scrutiny followed this expansion. The ministry was earning $110 million annually by 2002 thanks to music. There have been rumors of a $10 million Learjet being utilized for luxury trips and other purposes. Discussions concerning transparency and prosperity teaching were triggered by these stories. Tell Them I Love Them, published in 1986, marked the beginning of Joyce Meyer's writing career. She also never truly stopped once she got going. She had written more than 100 novels by 2010, something that very few Christian writers had ever accomplished. Battlefield of the Mind, her best-known work, had an unexpected impact. Almost 30 million copies were sold worldwide, and it remained on Christian bestseller lists for almost 500 weeks, or nearly 10 years. She has 5 books simultaneously in the top charts in 2010 alone. By 2011, Battlefield of the Mind had sold over 2 million copies, according to a later publisher's weekly assessment, and the number continued to rise. Her name gradually became well-known in Christian households all around the world. Additionally, her novels influenced hitherto silent discussions. When her book Beauty for Ashes was published in 2011, it included heartbreaking new information on her father's attempts to silence her. She described how she remained silent for years out of fear of being imprisoned. The book was not just a testimonies book. Millions of readers gained a better understanding of trauma and recovery because to it. Numerous survivors reported that it strengthened them and provided a forum for churches to openly discuss abuse rather than dismissing it. Her ministry's influence extended to extensive relief efforts. Joyce Meyer Ministries reported $110.5 million in assets in 2010. Her charity assisted in providing approximately 50,000 survivors with $5 million worth of food, water, and medical supplies following the Haitian earthquake that year, which claimed the lives of over 200,000 people. That was just a tiny portion of their activities. In Miracle Village, her team constructed hundreds of houses that provided long-term housing for Haitian families. These initiatives sparked debate but also demonstrated the extent of her influence. Given that such a vast ministry required a robust financial system, people questioned if monies were spent wisely. Her ministry became a member of the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability in 2009. The ECFA called for stringent audits and openness following a Senate probe into megachurch spending. According to reports, outreach and charitable activity accounted for over 90% of the ministry's funding. That was how they demonstrated that they were making an effort to get better. Previous scandals, such as a $23,000 music marble commode that was bought with ministry funds, contributed to the accreditation. That particular detail became a symbol of criticism and disseminated music everywhere. However, the ECFA reports also demonstrated changes in royalties and wages as well as initiatives toward more prudent spending. Nearly 20,000 women attended the Women Arise conference in St. Louis in 2012. Joyce talked about how she was abused in her previous marriage and how her second spouse, Dave, helped her heal from years of emotional harm. The occasion broke the musical taboo around topics that many churches shied away from. Counselors offered practical solutions, and survivors spoke on panels. It was one of the first occasions that such a large gathering allowed for such difficult discussions. Her ministry expanded beyond conferences and sermons. She joined forces with International Justice Mission in 2015 to combat human trafficking. Over 1,000 victims were saved by them collectively. They constructed safe homes, sponsored raids, and offered legal assistance. Joyce frequently claimed that her urge to defend people was influenced by her past. With each rescue, an adult or child was at last able to wake up fearlessly. These initiatives demonstrated the extent of hidden suffering in the world and the fervor with which her ministry sought to address it. Her YouTube channel reached 1 million subscribers by 2020. There, she related intimate tales, such as the moment, music, in her 20s when she was on the verge of suicide. She claimed that until a friend stepped in, trauma and depression drove her to her breaking point. Those who were caught up in similar feelings benefited from her candor. Music, she became one of the few Christian leaders who were not ashamed to discuss mental health, music. Her ministry discreetly provided funding for 100 adoptions of abused children between 2015 and 2020. They assisted adoptive families, offered counseling, and covered legal costs. Although many people were unaware of these tales, each adoption represented a fresh start for a harmed child. This initiative was hardly ever advertised by the ministry. They merely provided assistance when it was required. However, her ministry was also heavily criticized. The St. Louis Post-Music Dispatch published a 4-part expose in November 2003 that revealed Dave made $450,000 annually while Joyce made $900,000. It also discovered that a $2 million home and 4 more residences for their children, each valued at an additional $2 million, were made possible by gifts from the organization. The furniture in their $20 million headquarters cost $5.7 million. The most startling element was the marble commode, which cost $23,000. Many questioned how a ministry that receives over $100 million in donations annually could support such expenditures. The outcry was loud and quickly gained traction. Joyce and 5 other televangelists were the subject of an investigation by Senator Chuck Grassley in 2007. The Grassley Six were their name. The investigation examined luxury spending, foreign accounts, and private aircraft. Joyce Meyer Ministries was under close investigation since it spent roughly $100 million annually. Only 2 ministries completely complied with all requests, including Joyce's. Although no illicit behavior was found, the probe forced the government to increase public transparency and oversight. When audits showed that staff members had spent $500,000 on cosmetic surgery in 2005, there was even more criticism. The notion of enhancing one's reputation for ministry work was criticized for sounding like a pretext. In 2009, other reports surfaced, putting more pressure on the ministry to provide an explanation. These incidents turned into discussion points for funders and monitoring organizations who questioned whether the ministry's principles were changing. Joyce's book sales brought in roughly $30 million by 2010. Her new royalty structure brought in more than she had previously earned, despite the fact that her salary had decreased to $250,000. It was dubbed self-enrichment by some. Others argued that since the books were her own creations, it was reasonable. Nevertheless, the ministry experienced a decline in donations and even had to temporarily discontinue several outreach initiatives. After years of criticism, actual reforms were implemented. In 2009, the ministry established a board with the majority of members unrelated to Joyce and Dave, increased monitoring, and released yearly music financial reports. Their accountability grade increased to a C as a result of these modifications. Although it wasn't flawless, it was a step in the direction of a more defined structure. There was no legal action taken, and the ministry maintained its tax-exempt status. The Dyer controversy followed. The head of Dyer Television Network, Joni Lamb, disregarded her granddaughter's sexual assault between 2021 and 2020, according to a 2024 article by journalist Julie Roy. Music, according to family sources and internal documentation, the warnings were ignored. The word got out fast. For nearly 2 decades, Joyce's show had been broadcast on Dyer. She stopped broadcasting there in January 2025, claiming she was unable to continue working for a network that was the target of such grave accusations. This problem became personal because of her past. Many perceived her decision as a bold stance, and she took a step back until law police could handle the situation. She moved her program to YouTube, Lifetime, and TBN after quitting Dyer. Over 500,000 people saw her teachings every day because to these sites. Her internet reach increased, particularly among younger people, but she did lose roughly 10% of her previous Dyer audience. YouTube provided devotionals, live Q&A sessions, and a forum for more candid discussions. Her programs were solidly established on TBN and Lifetime by the end of 2025, and her online presence continued to grow. Deeper problems inside the network itself were revealed by the Daystar dispute. Joni's son, Jonathan Lamb, accused her of financial malfeasance, including paying for a $100,000 honeymoon in 2023 with a Dyer credit card. He added that Joni kept payroll data confidential and made over $1 million annually. Dyer denied all of this, claiming that her compensation was authorized by an independent agency. However, court records revealed that Marcus Lamb had given her instructions to match their total salaries upon his passing. Jonathan's dismissal and subsequent public arguments put an end to the family conflicts. These incidents brought back memories of Joyce's own financial troubles, and she openly advocated for more regulations to safeguard children in ministries. Her daily devotional for November 14, 2025, was titled "Discipline Brings Reward." She talked about maintaining integrity in music and being truthful at challenging times. Her statements echoed the circumstances, although she did not mention the day. She related biblical tales of people who endured unjust treatment yet remained steadfast in their faith. In a single week, almost 400,000 people downloaded that devotional. Those who were observing her handle yet another conflict season found it moving. Once more, the audience was captivated by her ability to relate spiritual truth to personal difficulty.